So, would I consider the 80s an exploitative era of the female scream queen? Well, does depend on the film, because actually the 80s there was a bit of a step from 70s and especially 60s cinema in which females, particularly lead roles and scream queens, were more, they were tougher and they fought back and wasn't such damsels in distress. Take for example Hellraiser with Ashley Lawrence. She wasn't your stereotypical dramatic, ah, look at me, I'm in trouble. She fought back, she did deals with Cenobites, and you know, she wasn't just a victim. She had spirit, fight and oomph. Same goes for Heather Langenkamp in A Nightmare on Elm Street. She wasn't a pushover. In fact, she was the only one who really took it upon herself to resolve the issue of Freddy Krueger, whereas the males were getting picked off in that, really, and if anything they were actually the useless ones, especially Johnny Depp's character falling asleep, letting her down. So I actually think it reversed, because if you go back to exploitation 70s cinema, then females were used a lot more for the skin factor, for sleaze, for nudity, for sex scenes, rape and revenge films. That shifted in the 80s. Going a little bit off piece, you've got Aliens, which actually was marketed as a sci-fi horror initially, but it is really a sci-fi action. But still, you had Elaine Ripley by Sigourney Weaver, who really was she became a horror action icon from that. There was no damsel in distress there, and there was no real nudity. We moved from Alien, from 79, of the B movie of her in the little 10-year-old's knickers, going into actually her being with her gun, which, you know, it is sexualized to an extent. We did this in film studies back when I was doing it, but she still is the brave, bold, hard-ass woman who goes and kicks butt when the Marines are incapable of doing it. And again, the same for many other horror films of the 80s. Don't get me wrong, there's always been the indie underground stuff, and you've got like Slumber Party Massacre and exploitation films, which I do adore, and they have one reason sometimes, which I'll go into later in this because of some of the questions we're delving into. But I wouldn't say it was overly exploitative. I would say there are some, but it was a shift. The more exploitative franchise of the 80s probably was the Friday the 13th series, where there was a lot of breaking the horror rules of sex in the woods and Jason Voorhees killing them, and they were more exploited to have entertainment of that value on screen. But not all. I said a lot of franchises did move away from it, I personally feel. So, do I think Linnea Quigley was cast more for her body than her performance? That is a tough question. I do love the films she's in, Return of the Living Dead particularly, but she was exploited, because growing up watching horror films, she was the naked chick in horror films. That was her. Return of the Living Dead, which I can't believe has dropped a rating. It was quite outrageous of the nudity when I was younger looking at that film. And the acting, to me, can be cheesy. However, is that blaming the person, or is that blaming the film, the environment, the filmmaker? Because she was in a lot of independent B-movie horrors, which are known for not silly acting, but maybe over the top, maybe cheesy, especially of the 80s. They are products of their time, and people go through great depths these days to try and recreate them, most of the time unsuccessfully, because it is hard to recreate the magic of what was with them. But getting back to it, I do feel like she was partly cast and exploited because of doing nudity, because some actresses won't do nudity or have it in their clause. I know a lot of B-movie actresses, particularly in the 80s, they were coaxed into doing it. We do live in different times now for that, although there are stronger films than ever, but the approach and everything is different. Whereas some of the films that Linnea Quigley was in were really more exploitative. I wasn't complaining as a young guy watching them, and it does add to the package. But I do believe her participation in showing skin did help her gain recognition, helped her gain parts, and did help her for future roles as well. And I do think it was a stepping stone for building a career of hers, especially when you look at her workout video and other film roles she did, and the legacy. I do think it adds to it. And if you take those roles away, then yes, I don't think her career would have been quite as fulfilling as it turned out to be. So, a 1980s Scream Queen. Well, the 80s giving birth to a Scream Queen, essentially. Well, that is an interesting one, because to me, and the tropes that came with a Scream Queen is a strong female character, but not starting their journey out like that. So it would be a woman who finds danger, is in peril, and has to find her inner strength to overcome it. They are usually a sort of girl next door, but a bit sexualized. However, they don't break the horror rules. So they are the virgin, the one that doesn't have sex or do drugs or smokes or is a naughty person. They are the survivor by following the rules and, you know, walking away from that. That is what the Scream Queen is. But obviously being in a lot of danger, screaming, running away. So it's a bit of a conflict and a double barrel there, because part of them, they are the damsel in distress, but at the same time, they fight back as best they can and normally overthrow and win. There is some great Scream Queens out there. Normally, the Scream Queen doesn't actually show as much flesh as the other cast who break the rules of 80s horrors, where they bed someone, or they'll flash, or they'll be topless, and they will die. Brutal death from a serial killer. That's pretty much the rules for me and for most of the horror films. And it is, you know, it's still a trope that is followed today. Although some filmmakers and some films try to break them, they are still there in one way or another. The formula's never really changed through the 90s, through the noughties, the present modern films now all still homage and follow that to an extent, and most 80s films pretty much followed that. The running and screaming is a must, and normally as they're running they will trip over and they will fall over and they will be crawling and the killer will be getting closer. We'll never catch up to them no matter what speed they fall and crash bang and wallop into stuff, because, you know, they can't catch them now. Also hiding and sweating and heavy breathing while covering their mouth, trying to noisily not get attention of a killer searching them out. I mean, these are all stupid things when you say out loud, but in a film it's fun, it's tense, it does create cool atmosphere, it allows for some creative shots, and if you took all that away it would be quite boring, although realistically a lot of these Scream Queens would have been caught and knocked off way before they do, because they normally mess up a lot. A Scream Queen also does involve the kind of lost voice which no one really listens to. They think they're pathetic, and the machos, the men and the other women want to go and face it and be all heroic but over the top, and they windmill in and get knocked off. The Scream Queen is normally more reserved and a bit logical, though hysterical, because they normally see everyone around them die and they find all the bodies, so they'll be suffering PTSD for the rest of their life and they'll be probably mentally disturbed. But still, you know, it all comes to the territory of being the final girl and the Scream Queen, which is an honour to have, I think. For an actress, I think that is an awesome thing. They normally make a cool career out of it. You'll see them at conventions signing, and it's interesting to see some of them return as legacy characters now and embrace that. I do like that. I think it's fantastic. The ones that are around still embrace fans, show up and are willing to reprise that role. Particularly like Jamie Lee Curtis is awesome that she's come back and done the Halloween films. Not that it was a great send-off, but it was cool to see her back as Laurie Strode. It was cool to see Neve Campbell back as well for Scream, and I think it's cool of Jennifer Love Hewitt to come back for I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. Well, I Know What You Did Last Summer, even though the world is unkind to some of these people now, because it's like you're not allowed to age, but I still think it's great to see them embracing and doing that. Whereas obviously, you know, you do get some people that move on and try to wash their hands of how they started out in film. It's great that, you know, some recognise the stepping stone it had in their careers, because to be honest with you, horror, especially in the 80s, was an awesome stepping stone for filmmakers, for actors, for actresses, and especially Scream Queens. It really was a good platform. So yeah. So, 80s horror films and horror films in general have been appearing on adult sites, pornography and things. So does pornography and horror go hand in hand? Well, yes, it does, to me. I'll be straight out there. Sleaze and sex sells, but horror films are one of the greatest genres to mix that. So, let's not beat around the bush. The biggest selling videos and films of all time are porn. That's fact. Horror is one of the most successful genres. It comes and goes, it has its phases, but it's always a strong, consistent genre. You whack those two together and you do have a winning formula. Whether the film's crap, whether, you know, it's Oscar worthy or not, you know, it doesn't matter. They will get bums on seats. People that moan, The critics hate them, the reviews, it doesn't matter, because secretly people have curiosity and want to see them. We've seen a big shift in this recently as well. It's bigger than ever. Art, sex and film, like what's the lines, what's the crossing. Now, 80s horrors, they did feature a lot of nudity. It was a selling point. I mean, you've got to look at the times we lived in, especially in the UK. Being in the UK, pornography was very hard to come by in the UK. There was no 18R restricted rating. You weren't allowed to buy or own this stuff. It was obscene. You'd actually serve time in prison. Like Bendover did serve time in prison for filmmaking of that kind. So the best way of seeing a bit of skin and a bit of naughtiness and topless ladies or naked ladies running around was a horror film. So people were getting like their horror fix and also their kind of adult entertainment in one. That is how it really boomed over here particularly. I know it is the same for other places, but obviously we live in a world now where you're only a click away on the internet. Well, I don't know about the UK now, and as long as you've got your face recognition and all your IDs, but still, you know, it is different. However, I am quite shocked this day and age. Myself, I am growing up in a censored UK with the BBFC coming in from the nasties and banning everything and cutting everything. I was used to censorship. I used to have to import films and find other ways. Now I'll go to the cinema and I'll see some outrageous shots, sometimes in a 15. I can't believe how times have changed. But to be honest with you, if I was watching an 80s movie, a horror film, I did expect a little bit of sleaze, and I did find it entertaining and fun, and it was appealing because it's a bit of a charm that goes with it. And as I was saying about the Scream Queens, you expect the friends around her to be making the mistakes of having sex and getting killed. So because the formula of 80s horror really did set that up as well, you expected sex scenes because you knew if someone was going to have sex, they were going to die, and that was part of the fun. You're like, oh, they're doing it, oh, they're going to get it now. Like, you know, it goes together. It's part of the package. If you start taking some of these elements away, then it's just not as fun, and then the audience aren't getting what they expect, and then the film's probably not going to do as well. Even if it's masterfully made, people do want to see certain things. So there's the blend of audience expectations and are you going to deliver? But it does go together, because seeing people in distress but having their rocks kicked off beforehand, it's a controversial area if you really want to dig deep into it, of the psychiatry, and you know, this is quite a hot topic that could be very delved into, and it can be problematic. I'll be honest, I do find the rape and revenge genre, the subgenre of horror films, interesting. There was a lot of debates about that from both perspectives of males and females, and there's a really good book written on this. And I know the BBFC had a real field day with I Spit on Your Grave in particular, because although that was 78, taking it as an example that at the cinema, watching it is one experience, but when they rated it, watching it on home video, where they do pick on males in their essay, saying that they can watch the film out of order and they can just re-watch the rape scene and rewind it and re-watch it, and they take that into account with rating it, implying that people are using horror films for sexual pleasure like that. So it is a very hot topic to discuss. The rape and revenge genre also is fun in the sense that you see the revenge happen, usually in brutal ways, and making the woman become the hero, and the horrific story building up is used as a character arc so that you really feel for that person. You really feel that character. You want them to get their revenge. In fact, you're justifying that person making horrific crimes, doing horrific murders, getting horrific justice. It's justified through the first half of the film. So the sexual exploitation of it is used to, you know, character drive. However, some of these films, like Last House on the Left, they're sexualized in the rape as well. And I know Straw Dogs had a major issue with this. So the rape scene is sexualized. I Spit on Your Grave is sexualized. Without a doubt. It's not just a little rape or cut away. They are stripping the woman naked. They are exposing the viewer to breasts and arse and everything. And they're doing it in a sexualized way with the shots and how it's edited. And there's no beating around the bush for that. They are using it as a oh, look at this like naughty scene. Look at this woman. So that can be classed as problematic. And I know in the UK, they still funny on pornography that's done in torture way, fake rape way. They don't like it. That's still banned in a hardcore form. And sexual violence in general is also problematic to the BBFC in mainstream film. They still have a few little issues with that. It's a very grey area, and I know some people are very offended by some of those films, but there's even a worse subgenre out there, which was the Nazi sexploitation films, which it says it in the title. They were sexploitation films, and they were made to cash in on an audience that wanted to see exploitative content for sure. But the exploitative content is very bad taste. Still is. Probably worse than ever. It was quite shocking and controversial then, but it's not aged well now either. We do live in a world now where you look back on that, and it was risky then. It's in a different league now. So, yes, I think they go together because as a business it sells. But there is a problem with that as well. I think finding the balance is impossible because, I mean, we have parody films, which is a big thing. There is literally adult films made cashing in. There is a XXX version of Halloween. There is a Wet Dream on Elm Street. There is the Triple Exorcist. There is the Friday the 13th parody. The list goes on. In fact, you name a horror film, 99% of the time there'll be a parody of it, including the Human Centipede, can you believe? These things do exist. And they cash in on it on purpose because they know there's a fun side to it. And we live in a world now where an 80s horror film is just not strong enough. They want more. The content needs to be more. You have to compete with the crazy internet these days. So, you know, when does it stop and where's the line? That's an argument for another day. So, one of the most exploitative scream queens in the 1980s. Now, I'm going to honestly say Shelley Duvall, The Shining. The reason being is she was very mentally abused. So, I think she was exploited because she was a vulnerable woman and she was in an amazing film, but a director of his time and his methods are not really okay now. And you know, she comes across great. She is a stereotypical scream queen in this film, probably overlooked for it, but was the final girl, did stand up to Jack Nicholson and, you know, tried to protect her son and fought back at the horrors of the Overlook Hotel. But, she, you know, offset, she was, you know, her direction and the way she was like treated to get a performance was very hard, and you know, it destroyed her and she lost a bit of herself on that film. So for that reason, I do believe she was exploited and had probably one of the worst rides of the 80s scream queen, and one that I think is overlooked and not always an obvious one to a stereotypical scream queen. Which brings me to say that I would like to mention Mark Patton from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, who made the documentary Scream Queen. Now, not a stereotypical traditional Scream Queen, but A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is an interesting film as an 80s horror, where there is a gay undertone to that film, and I first saw that young. I found it an interesting film, but was also, like, I thought it was the weakest at the time, but I've grown to really appreciate and love it as one of the best now. Now, I was like 12 when I saw that, and the reason at first I was thrown is because it isn't a stereotypical Freddy Krueger film. And to be fair, when you see the director talk about it, he had a hard deal because there hadn't really been any rules set for Freddy at the time. It was a sequel to a Wes Craven classed as masterpiece, and it went in a different direction. And I was young, I'd seen the first one, loved it, went straight to the second one, and it was quite a different shift, which I do love now. But as a young member of the audience, I was a bit like, oh, this is strange. Just generally, like, the glove wasn't there for some of it, the knives are coming out, it's coming out of him. It's very different, but that's fantastic now. And Mark Patton really does play a scream queen in that film. You know, the fact that the film is a gay horror film and has a gay undertone is really interesting looking back. It was ahead of its time. It wasn't really known as a gay horror film for a long time. It was a little bit of a, you know, that wasn't openly discussed. Looking back at it as an adult and with fresh perspective, it's actually a very well crafted movie. And Mark Patton does play a great character of Jesse in it, which is a character where you can analyse that film exploring his sexuality, coming out, and making him a bit of a scream queen, as he self-proclaims. But he was obviously exploited in real life for this, and the fact that he was a gay actor was a bit of a downfall for him, which is a shame. He was cast out because of his sexuality, which means again he was exploited and had a very rough ride. So I do think it's worth mentioning that, you know, he was an exploited scream queen of the 80s essentially, and it's a shame because I think he could have had a very good career if things had gone in a slightly different direction for him. And I have seen other stuff he's been in, and he is good, and it is good to see that he's tried to have that passion and do filmmaking stuff. But I know he had a very tough time, and the era that he had it did not help. So I just would like to mention that one. Sleepaway Camp 3 ups the nudity, yes. And why do films keep upping it from then in the late 80s? That's actually quite easy, is because they need to keep outdoing themselves. They want audiences to return. They need to updo what they've done in previous entries. So they're pushing the content. So films like Sleepaway Camp 3, they just up that nudity because they just want to outdo what's been done and keep audiences excited and interested. And you can't go backwards. If you've gone somewhere in a film already, the audience have seen something, you can't double down on it, or you can't tame it, because people will just complain, their reviews will be bad, and it won't make any money. And this is going back to sex sales and adult films and horror films going hand in hand. The more you push the content, the more controversial you make it, the more naughty you make it, the more people are going to see it, people are going to talk about it. Even if it's good or bad reviews or good or bad talk, it will make people interested to see for themselves. So even if it's bad reviews, you've still got a lot of people to see it. You've still sold a lot of ticket prices, a lot of video rentals. You've made the money back. So as a business perspective, they are just driving an audience and customers to their products. It's really as simple as that, with upping it and having more nudity. You can't go wrong with sleaze in an 80s horror film. So out of a list of a few films I've been given, it's about what ones did I find most erotic from that era out of a select few films. And there are two that jumped out. Basic Instinct really jumped out, but also Cat People. And I'll start with Cat People because I think it's the lesser of the two, but the grade literally went out of its way, like the orange, deep, romantic sexual colours used, and literally the suggestive shots, the way it was told, the reimagining, the remake of the film Cat People, the 1982 film. You got Malcolm McDowell in it, and it's like, it's very sexualized on purpose. And Natasha Kinski is like immortalized in this film, where, you know, she was happy doing nude, let's put it that way. And you know, it is a very well made film, but the whole storyline is about sexuality and a sexual discovery journey. So it echoes an erotic film. It is made and served that way, which is why I do believe it does really stand out for that. But Basic Instinct by Paul Verhoeven in the early 90s with Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone, now that's a whole different league. I remember first seeing that film young, and too young, as always, with a lot of these films. And for a mainstream film, it was boundary pushing. Again, I've said this before about things, but in the UK particularly, we wasn't overly exposed to such daring nature, especially with stars like Michael Douglas in it, and, you know, and it being cinema released, and the publicity, it had a lot of publicity. It was a very well-known film. It was a very spoken about film, of course, because of the content. But even to this day, it's a very sexually charged film. Paul Verhoeven is a masterful filmmaker, and the cinematography by Jean de Bont in it is fantastic, to be quite honest. You know, you've got very sexualized shots, very suggestive shots. The lighting has got this like neo-noir, like erotica to it. Everything about that film feels quite erotic. It's very steamy and sweaty. The triangles of relationships and the love triangles and the deceitfulness of it, and then there's the sexuality with Sharon Stone's character playing him off, that she's seeing a woman, she's seeing a man, she's bisexual. I know the film caused a lot of uproar and controversy when it launched, and it got Paul Verhoeven in quite a bit of deep water, but I think the film still holds and stands as a sexually charged erotic thriller, and very well crafted and made. It's got a very interesting, ambiguous ending as well. Like, it really is left to the viewer to decide where that was going to go, which is, that can annoy some people sometimes. I like it if it's done right. I think Basic Instinct does do it quite right. I think it's very interesting. It's asking you, if would you trust that person, your lover? Do you trust your lover? Is your lover capable of crimes of passion, of hard murderous crimes? Do you know someone as well as you think they do? There's a lot going on in Basic Instinct. I think it can be overlooked how deep that film is, just because on top it is a sexy, naughty thriller with some very controversial, extreme scenes, all of its time anyway. And I do feel like it works for that film, because that film does incorporate it. It's not exploitation for exploitation's sake, like something like I Spit on Your Grave, which is like an exploitative film, which I have spoken about before, where they use sexual violence to eroticize scenes and things. That Basic Instinct is on a different level of that. That's not a sleazy exploitation film. It's a sophisticated mainstream sleazy film, but well worth checking out, and a film that has definitely stood the test of time and is so much more than what it appears on the surface, and is well worth digging deeper into.